Welcome to Business Prowess with Raphael and Dr. Andrea. Our show will bring you the best insights, ideas, and inspiration from successful entrepreneurs and CEOs in the business world. Don't miss out on the opportunity to learn from the best and stay ahead of the game. Sifa Raphael is the founder of 5 unique shows. He's a fitness professional, solutions expert, executive coach, and head instructor at Max Martial Arts and Fitness in New York. Dr. Andrea Adams-Miller is an award-winning international keynote speaker, best-selling author, and CEO of the Red Carpet Connection Publicity, Publishing, and Talent Agency, and CEO of IgniteYourRelationship.com. Known as the Dream Maker, she makes visionaries' dreams come true, bigger than they ever dare to desire.
And welcome to the show. We are having a really great day already. I'm with this lovely man, John. Would you introduce yourself so I can make sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly?
Okay, my name is John Guaspari.
Guaspari. Thank you so much. So, John, when you first found out about, business prowess and the idea of looking into business and, the idea of real engagement over hype, what did that mean for you? What are some of the things that came up for you mentally that you thought, oh, this will be a super fun show to do?
Well, the last 30 years of my professional career, I've been retired from active consulting for about the past 10 years, but I've continued writing. And the last, most of that 30 years of consulting, the first 20 years of it, well, I didn't realize that I was working in the area of employee engagement, although it wasn't called that at the time. And it was only over about the final 10 years that it became explicitly about engagement. And so that word became the theme, and I realized that was what I'd been doing for the previous 20 years and wound up being what I'd done for 30 years. And so my last 2 books were about employee engagement. So,
well, that is impressive. I employee engagement and retention and growth. I did a chapter in a book about it about 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's funny that, it's like both of us have been thinking about it for all of these years. So what do you think has changed in the last, decade that has made it, something that we should look at differently?
Well, my experience is, it's been, you said 15 years ago, and that's about the time, the early 2000s is when a lot of organizations really began to pay serious attention to it. And it's because that's when a lot of research was done that demonstrated close correlation between higher levels of employee engagement and things like higher levels of productivity, profitability, employee retention rates, good, hard business results. So lots of organizations engaged, and lots of organizations undertook serious-minded efforts to increase levels of engagement. But my observation over those 20 years was the way a lot of them went about it was, not to put too fine a point on things, wrong.
Right.
That they used the definition of engagement that they used was not the correct definition. That if I can explain a little bit further, that
please. The point of this for people to be able to grab in concept the idea. So, which definition are you going to define first?
Well, the word engagement is a pretty common word, and often we think of it in a mechanical sense, such as gears engaging.
Okay.
And that's a perfectly reasonable definition.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you call somebody up, you say, I engaged her in a phone call. Perfectly reasonable definition. But the definition of engagement that it was at the heart of all of that research that demonstrated the correlation with all of those great business benefits was the extent to which employees will invest incremental effort and energy on the task at hand, which, while it might be related to coming together, it's not necessarily the same thing. And what a lot of organizations wound up doing was saying, well, we're having a meeting, we'll throw people together in breakout sessions, we have therefore engaged them, and we can check that box.
Mm.
And they wound up being disappointed and kind of dismissing this whole engagement thing. And that's a big part of where what my work was about, to try and disabuse them of that notion and say, wait a minute, stop and think about the language you're using, because these things are tricky. And if you start out with the wrong definitions in mind, you're not going to get there.
I understand what you mean. So, how did you help define that for them? What were you telling them should be the better way, or the better way to act as an engagement with everyone?
Well, again, I try to help people focus. In my new book, the title of which is "If Engagement is the What, Then Respect is the How." That, okay. And I lay out 4 what are generally considered to be the intangibles: respect, trust, empowerment, and engagement. And I say, if you respect, trust, empowerment, and engagement, and how those things fit together. And that if you start out with the correct definition of those things, you're more likely to achieve them. And so engagement comes at the end. You can't, that the engagement is the result of a lot of other things having been done well.
Mm-hmm.
But so you need to view engagement as that notion of the extent to which people will invest incremental effort and energy on the task at hand. Well, how do you get them to do that? They're more inclined to do that if they're empowered. Well, what does empowerment mean? Again, too many organizations, this example is in my book. I was at a meeting of a very large organization, which was presenting the results of a survey they had done of all their employees, which asked employees basically the extent to which they felt empowered.
Right.
And I was consulting to them, and I was sitting in the back of the room while the results were being presented. And you could tell that the president of the company was frustrated because the results were disappointing. And he was a good guy, well-meaning guy, not a bad guy, smart guy. But he got up at the end and said the meeting was of his reports and their direct report, his direct reports and their direct reports. So the higher level people in a very large organization. Mm-hmm. And he said to them, you people need to understand, you are empowered. And I need you to go back and tell your people that they are empowered.
So I'm going to stop you for just a second, so we have a little bit more conversational flow.
Sure.
As far as so when I hear empowerment, obviously in this case, this gentleman is telling them they're empowered, but I guess in the act of being empowered means that you're allowing them to make decisions, to have ideas and knowledge that they can put into action without being micromanaged or double checking or anything. And is that where your philosophy?
Yeah, exactly. You don't just decree it.
Yeah, and it sounds
they have to feel it.
That's what that guy was doing. Like, you are now.
Great. Exactly. I mean, and one last part, and then I'll stop filibustering with the story. But he said that, and from where I was sitting, I could see one of his vice presidents was sitting in the front of the room, and he was starting to put his hand up like he wanted to say something, and then he put it down. And then there was a break, and during the break, I managed to collar that guy and said, you look like you wanted to say something, when he said, you are empowered. He said, yeah, I did. I said, well, what was it you wanted to say? He said, well, we can tell people they're empowered till we're blue in the face, but if they don't feel empowered, they're not empowered. So I said, why didn't you say it? He said, oh no, too risky.
Because he didn't feel empowered.
Exactly. The irony was he didn't feel empowered to tell us that his definition of empowerment was off. So the definition of empowerment that I offer is it's a feeling of safety while exercising judgment on the job. You're on the job. You're making a call. I don't mean a phone call. I mean, you're making a decision. You're exercising a judgment. Do you feel safe that if you that even if things go south, you're not going to get slammed for it? You know, to your point, that it's people feel that they have some agency, that they can do things, make some decisions without feeling they're going to get slapped down. You know.
Yeah. I love that. That is very funny. I love the idea of just knighting people. You are empowered. Ta-ta! And that's the thing is too, is people, even when people are empowered, they sometimes they need to be taught what that physically looks like or sounds like. So,
yes.
Giving them instructions on, like, so if you, what do you think about this? And then being aware of their personality, so if they're a high knowledge person, they might need time to think about, and especially if they're an engineer. I find engineers need time, or accountants, that type of knowledge person needs a moment to assess all the information and then be able to provide it here or there. So definitely I see that happening. And then, other people are fast paced and can give answers right away. But if they don't know how they're allowed to address that information, they may or may not do that. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And then I'm hearing your cat meow. I am also a cat person, so I'm laughing because I'm like,
I'm sorry. There's no.
You don't need to apologize.
The floor plan of my place.
I think it's funny. No complaints.
I can't segregate them.
So I wanted to. I'm not complaining. I want to. Their cat wants to engage in the show, is what I'm saying.
He may enter. You may see them wandering around behind me.
Yeah. So everything on here is part of the conversation, because one of the things I like about our show and what we do is we're real life. So I also have a cat who's part of my business who might get up here, be behind me, and do what we're doing. And that's part of business as well, is when you can handle flexibility and adaptability to be able to handle things in the workplace or wherever we're at. And so tell me a little bit more about, when we're looking at, so I'd like to talk about finances with that, like financials, on when someone chooses to let somebody go rather than look at what is possible to retain them, to keep them there. What are your thoughts with that?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Yeah, so when when an organization, they have a choice. They can let somebody go, or they could create some different methodologies to retrain, reinform, to keep them retained within the company, and the cost of doing either or. So the pros and cons of keeping or letting somebody go. If we could maybe move into that discussion.
But full disclosure, I'm not a finance guy. But yes, those conversations should be, to the extent possible, as transparent as possible. People need to understand that those bases have at least been considered. Those options have been considered. That people have had a chance. That management has at least thought of those things and aren't cavalierly just lopping off heads. But yeah. I don't really have a lot to offer on that score.
I'll go ahead and follow up on that, and then I'll let you move us to the next point. So since I brought it up, so years ago, some of the research that I had looked, now this is 15 years ago when I did research on that, and what we were noticing in the numbers at that time is, and they very much parallel now, they're just even higher financially. So let's say someone has a job of $40,000 in a job. In order to replace that person, when they leave, now the other people are now upset or frustrated. Now they're filling in for the other person's job. So not only are they filling in for that person's job and doing all the work, now they also have to train the new person which often is hired at the same or more value than the other person who left because time has passed. And now, so already now we have this shift of value. And now there's this new disruption of everybody who's already working. So the statistics had shown that in having someone leave and the time it takes to retrain them and the work and the chaos and everything it causes for everyone else, it could go from like 40,000 to 120,000 of money invested to handle that situation. Where nowadays, if we were to look at those numbers now, a year later, it sounds like it would be more like, closer to 100,000 to 250,000. If someone was income was 100,000, it'd be, or excuse me, 100,000 would be more like 250,000 in order to replace them to get the work done and to make it work.
So there's false economies.
Yeah. So you just have to be very aware that, and now obviously if that person is causing so much disruption within the company and they're not taking any consulting and not taking any coaching and they're not open to change, or they're sexually harassing somebody, obviously you have to let them go. But if they just need some reframing of what they do and have some more parameters of what's acceptable, what's not, in an engagement, pretty much engagement instruction, keeping that person may be more valuable to the company, depending on that. So that's what that research has shown and experience. So what are some other topics that you have noticed within this engagement and retention and growth that you have seen or witnessed to happen?
Well, again, the one of the things that I've earlier on discovered that a very effective way of getting people more highly engaged is to get more people more as closely as possible connected with customers. I'm not saying get them meddling around with the work that the sales force might be doing, but demonstrating to them how their work affects the value that's ultimately delivered to the customer, so that they don't feel like they're just ciphers sitting in their little office or cubicle, and that, well, I'm just an administrative person, I don't have anything to do with the customer. Rather, turn it around and make it very explicit and make it very clear to them that, as a matter of fact, what you do does have an impact on the customer. Mm-hmm. I did some work earlier on. One of the things that I and my business partner did earlier on in my career was we would take customer population, client populations, and build little 3-person teams, triads, train them in how to go and engage and conduct what we called customer value conversations with customers. And these people, these triads, were not normally customer-facing functions. They might be people from the back office, from the back room, and so on. And what we found was that when they came back, they often saw things that the traditional customer-facing functions did not see. They were able to bring a different perspective and insight, but also it just raised their energy level. They said, oh, now I understand why I'm here. I have a role to play. I can bring more to the enterprise. I can bring more value instead of, again, as I said earlier, I'm not just a cipher sitting here doing some drudgery. Mm-hmm. We're a team that's putting together something that is truly of value. We are of service to somebody out there. People innately want to be of service to others. And if one can find ways to make clear how they are doing that, that can be an important way to, again, tap into that incremental effort and energy, which is the definition of engagement. Right.
So let's talk a little bit more about the customer connection. So when you're looking at, customer satisfaction, tell me how you guys were looking at the Japanese quality control and how that was instrumental for customer connection in your assessment.
Well, that's actually how I wound up in the world of consulting. I was working for a company that made in the state. I'm working for an American company that made what was called automatic test equipment that we sold to manufacturers of electronic equipment. And in those days, now we're back in the early 1980s. In those days, the American mindset regarding quality was you did your best, there's going to be mistakes. So the strategy for quality was make mistakes, inspect it, find the problems, and fix them. Total quality management, one of the basic tenets of total quality management was you shouldn't, in the limit, you shouldn't have mistakes. And the proper strategy should not be inspect and fix. The proper strategy should be you should have focus on building processes that are reliable and robust and repeatable enough that there aren't mistakes made in the first place. And we made testers, so this was clearly of strategic significance to us. And I wound up being given the assignment to try and figure out how we can survive in this world. And I did a lot of research and wound up coming to the conclusion that what we needed to be able to do was make more clear to that we weren't going to be able to survive if that's all that we were delivering. And that the way companies were going to be able to survive would be that if their employees understood that what customers were buying wasn't the ability to say, I'll buy a car and that in the first 6 months I'm going to have to bring it into the dealer 3 times to get it fixed. And oh, isn't it great that I have a great warranty? We did it in those days because that's what it meant. What customers wanted, what really turned things around in the automobile industry was that Toyota, and at the time it was called Datsun, now it's Nissan, were building cars that didn't have defects.
Right.
And Americans were used to buying a car in the first 6 months of new car ownership. You had to bring it in 4 or 5 times for repairs, but you had a great warranty. All of a sudden, Toyota and Datsun were delivering cars where you didn't have to do that, and it changed the customer's mindset completely and turned the American automobile industry on its ear. And that rippled through all kinds of industries. And the irony is that the experts who taught Japan how to do that were Americans who were trying to teach Detroit that in the 50s and 60s, and Detroit wouldn't listen. So they went to Japan and taught them.
Interesting. I taught industrial organizational psychology, and taking some of the different methodologies, the word is eluding me right at the moment, but the Japanese influence on how they look at processes and ergonomics and how everything works streamlined was quite fascinating, and allowed me to bring a lot into the classroom to really help my students understand and grasp how they could change not only their personal life, but their business.
Kaizen might have been the term, continuous improvement.
Yes, that is it. It was definitely Kaizen. And I had a lot of fun with that. You know, we literally would set up the classroom differently. I literally brought in a toaster, a loaf of bread and butter, and had them set up best ways to Kaizen making toast. And it's funny because one of the things I had utilized at that time to tell my students is I had gone into a Tim Hortons, one of the rare it's funny. I think that's one of the reasons I don't go to that restaurant. I think I've eaten there 3 times ever since it's opened, and I didn't like it because I didn't like how they had things organized. So they would take your order and then go way over here to do the register, away from where you ordered, and then they would go They were doing some kind of like a Danish thing or some kind, and they did the bread on one counter, but had to turn around and take the food in the aisle, pass other people to go over here to put the ham, and then go over there. And they were crisscrossing each other with food in their hands, and it drove me nuts. And I remember using that as an example and telling my students I wanted them to go into that restaurant and watch how they prepared food, how it was so out of order. And then I used that toast exercise for them to set up how you would toast for the Kaizen method.
We consulting company I work for, because most quality initiatives originally took place on the factory floor for obvious reasons. Because stuff broke, physical stuff broke, there was physical inventory, those were big costs were there. But eventually it made its way into administrative areas, and it isn't as obvious in administrative areas because it's just paper moving around. You don't see things breaking. And we designed a simulation where and it became a real popular product that we were able to deliver to our clients, in which we simulated, and we were trying to figure out how can we simulate something that would be doable in an afternoon for clients. I remember we were sitting in a conference room and trying to figure out what we could do, and a secretary came in. They were called secretaries then, sorry, administrative assistant came in and dropped a FedEx package on the table for one of us. And we went, that's it. We'll simulate package delivery. And we designed it so that it was originally set up analogous to the Tim Hortons, where the toaster would be here and the butter would be there and the waiter would be here, and things were all misaligned and all out of order.
Yeah.
And then we'd do a round of deliveries. We made up like employee directories, and so people got fake employee directories of fictitious names, and people got cards which said, okay, this package has to go from employee A to employee B, and they'd have to look up in the directory where they were. And in the first round, it would take them 25 minutes to complete it, and there'd be 11% defect rate and so on. And then we'd say, okay, now we teach them a little lesson in between the round, not quite give them all of Kaizen, but pieces of it. And then we'd say, apply this lesson. And they, instead of taking 25 minutes, it took 9 minutes, and the defect rate came down to 5%. And by the end of the day, they could blow through it in a minute and a half with 0 defects. And it was it also, because it was fun for people, because they were moving around and they really got into it because it was a competition, because people like competitions. But yes, I mean, the Tim Hortons example you gave is perfect. And there's examples of that kind of stuff all around us.
Mm-hmm.
We used to say to people, I did a lot of speaking in my day, and I traveled a lot, and in some ways it was perfect because I could almost count on the fact that something would happen between the time I left home and arrived at the site I was supposed to speak that I could use as an example in my talk. And so I would tell the story and people would laugh, but then I would say, but you know what? I guarantee somewhere in your organization, you have the equivalent of whatever it was that I had just told them.
Yeah.
It's there. No one's trying to do it, but they're doing it. And the only way you're going to root that stuff out is by stepping back and looking at it from the customer's point of view. If you look at it from your point of view, it all makes sense. But if you look at it from the customer's point of view, like I just helped you do on the story I just told you about the experience I had with the, rental car company or the hotel or whatever it was. We all see it like that. Well, I said, you're doing the same thing. to your customers. Force yourself to come around the other end of the telescope, and then you'll see it. So, and that's a very good way to get people engaged.
Definitely so. So I noticed that you had done training videos as well. So I'd love to hear more about that. I had the opportunity to act in some training videos. So I am also an actress. So it's fun to do business and do acting. And so I'd love to hear about how you decided, how long you made these videos, and what at the time, because I know things have changed now. Now if we did a training video that lasted 15 minutes, I don't know if people would be able to watch them because their attention span is so short. But what made you decide like what would be in these training videos, and how were you training them within those videos?
You're right. It was a long time ago, and the rule was 15 minutes is the max length.
Yeah.
Back then, and I can't imagine that you could do it for that length now. I suspect you're right. One of the videos that I made was called Why Quality, WHY Quality. And again, the answer was, it's because it's what customers are paying for. And I think in that video, there were 4 short little vignettes, which kind of were based on maybe some of the stories I had gathered and, that I would tell in speeches. And so I sat down with the people who wrote the scripts and did a dump and said, here are some stories I tell. And they translated those into a screenplay, one of the things about communicating about this stuff is it needs to be simple, it needs to be clear, it needs to be crisp, and God forbid, maybe even can be a little bit entertaining. It's not bad that people might look at it and chuckle. We're not trying to be goofy, but it'll be more memorable if it strikes. If you can get them to chuckle, it means you've reached them in a way that. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's an involuntary response.
Yeah.
Another video that we did was called Time, the Next Dimension of Quality, which actually walked through. There was a principle that pretty much any work process could be, if you hadn't already applied these principles to it, you could reduce the number of steps in the process probably by 80% and take the cycle time down by 75%, just by applying some basic principles to it. There was another one called Quality in the Office, which again went back to this notion that, sure, on a factory floor, but what does it look like in an administrative setting? That kind of thing.
That one, that was the first corporate gig that I did. So I own multiple businesses, and I had a couple that had come in, and the male had $8 million business, and he ended up hiring me to do conflict resolution between the executive team and the factory workers, because they were at odds with each other, and because he liked how I did conflict resolution with him and his wife. So it's funny. So that's how I ended up getting more into business. So I went from relationships at home to relationships professionally. And you use a lot, and so I use a lot of stories as well when I'm doing things. Some of your books are based on story as well. And in the one you were talking, it says it's based on more of a storytelling, where you're talking about how some of the companies were acting on good faith, and how that just wasn't landing correctly and actually was very negative towards them. Would you address how that story came about and some of the things that came from that?
I'm not sure what
Let me
you're referring to.
You from the book. So it may not be, but I'm imagining this happens through a lot of your business, because it's called Otherwise Engaged. And so that one, how it's a humorous story,
Okay. Now I got you. I'm sorry. Okay. What I did in Otherwise Engaged, it was the Otherwise Engaged. The title was sort of in that the way you become more engaged is by focusing on the other person. So otherwise engaged.
Yeah.
And so the way I tried to tell it was I had kind of didactic chapters alternating with a story about do you remember the TV show Modern Family?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had in my head Phil and Claire Dunphy. Phil Dunphy particularly, because he was kind of a knucklehead.
Yeah.
Well-intentioned, but kind of a knucklehead.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I had in mind Phil Dunphy as though he were a management consultant, and he thought it would be a good idea to try and apply management consulting techniques within his family to make his family a more highly engaged family, which is a silly idea. I would never recommend it to anybody. And I hope I wrote it broadly enough so that everybody understood that this was meant as not seriously, because it gave me an opportunity to poke fun at the way a lot of the things I saw without having to name actual people who had done it. So I would show the Phil Dunphy family, the Phil Dunphy guy making ridiculous mistakes and trying to increase the level of engagement within his family. And then I have a didactic chapter kind of explaining why that was so bad. Then I have another chapter with the Phil Dunphy character showing how he had done empowerment all wrong. And then a didactic chapter explaining why that. And then another chapter about trust, and again, in respect. The heuristic that runs through my work in my new book is that respect begets trust, which begets empowerment, which begets engagement. And that it all has to begin with respect. That's the place that one ought to start.
So you're walking them down the trail.
Yeah, and the thing that makes respect so important is that respect is the one thing that you and I and everybody has complete control over. It doesn't matter what else is going on in the business. I have complete control over whether or not I treat somebody with respect. And
Yeah.
So that's why I start with respect. And the definition of respect I give in my book is giving due consideration to the other.
Yeah. Along those lines, I would love to talk a little bit more about that. So in respect, so I have told clients before that if you are having people on your staff, like if you've given them instruction, now hopefully you've empowered them that they can have feedback, but when they demand or command that you do something as the owner, they have lost that respect for you or no longer have respect for you. And then that's not to be tolerated, is when people, talk back. I don't mean talk back like I want people to push back and say, that's not a good idea, or to be able to say, like I was looking at this and I'm noticing some challenges and so forth. But I have had some clients where I've told them, like, well, let's do this and this, and they'll say, well, my accountant says I can't do that. And I'm like, well, why are they what is the reasoning behind it? And if it's just because that other person wants it or those are their rules, I'm like, wait, whose company is this? So I'd love you to address that.
Well, yeah, I mean, pushback is different from talkback. One of the things that I deeply believe is that respect must be presumptively given. It can be lost. It can be lost if you start acting up and acting out, but you must presumptively give respect to people. That there can be no. I hear people. If I hear somebody say, "Well, he hasn't earned my respect," I've actually said one-on-one to someone whom I heard say that, he hadn't earned my respect. I said, well, that's about as pompous and arrogant a statement as I can imagine. You know, who the blank are you to say so-and-so needs to earn my respect? You know, we all should, this sounds sappy, but I think it's true. We
Mhm.
all need to start out by treating each other with respect. If someone, again, not pushes back, but talks back, okay, then that may be different. But yeah, I mean, there are, and it doesn't mean that you have to throw rose petals in people's paths. It's a business. So, you know, to what you were saying, there can be good faith disagreements, but there's a business to run, and if things get out of hand, people need to address it, and people need to deal with it, and respectfully. I don't know if am I addressing what you, am I
Oh,
answering what you?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say that. Well, we have about 4 more minutes yet. What haven't we
Okay.
talked about that you really wanted to be able to share today?
Uh, no, just that I'm a big believer in precision, being precise about the use of language, and that a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders get a little bit sloppy and throw words around without being clear about what they mean. And if you're not clear, I mean, these things, you know, I've talked about respect and trust and empowerment, engagement. These are tricky things. And even if we're really clear about what they mean, and even if everybody agrees on what they mean, it's still really tricky. If we're not clear and we're not consistent, the chances of arriving at that destination that we want, that higher levels of engagement, go way down. So my soapbox, I'll get up on a soapbox for a second and just urge
Sure.
people, be precise about language. Ask yourself, am I being clear? Am I being precise? Am I setting expectations correctly? You know, that to me is that's the definition I offer for respect: confident expectation. If people know what to expect, then there can be respect. But if they don't know what to expect, they're guessing. They're flying blind, and then and if they miss something, and you land on them, how can they feel respected? And if they don't feel respected, they're not going to feel empowered. And if they don't feel empowered, they're certainly not going to feel engaged. So.
Absolutely. And tell people how they can find you.
They can find me. My website is johnguaspari.com. On the screen is my name. So it's John Guaspari, all one word, .com. And on my new book is If Engagement is the What, then Respect is the How. There's a link to that on my website. On the website are dozens of articles I've written on this stuff over the years. And even some, for a few years, I did a stint writing a humor column for a local paper. There's a bunch of those on there. Those people find fun to read at times. So
yeah, humor is always a great thing to read. And in closing, I'm Dr. Andrea Adams-Miller. I'm the CEO and founder of the Red Carpet Connection, and I work with elite entrepreneurs, celebrities, CEOs, influencers, athletes, to help them be seen and heard the way that they dreamed and desired, or even bigger than they dreamed and desired, so that they can live a life of wealth and legacy while they're still alive instead of waiting to leave it after they're gone. And I do that with publicity, connection, events, speaking opportunities, and then also helping them in their business by, I don't stay in my lane, I cross lanes so that I can make sure all the traffic's moving in one direction, and that's towards success. And you've been listening to Business Prowess. And that's usually with me, Dr. Andrea Adams-Miller, and Sifu Rafael Gomez. And we'll be back next Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. All right. Thanks so much, John, for being on, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you, Andrea.